Those papers prove nothing.
Then check the deed. I'm recording this. You humiliated the wrong woman.
Brandon Holt lifted the folder above his head, with one hand slowly, deliberately, like a man who wanted every single person in that office to watch. Then he opened his fingers. The folder hit the floor and exploded. Tax records, photographs, property documents, 62 years of a family's life scattered across the polished tile of Holt Premier Realty in every direction. A photograph slid all the way to the foot of the reception desk. Nobody moved. Brandon looked down at Dorothy Caldwell, 71 years old, sitting straight-backed in the chair across from him, and he smiled. "Let me be honest with you," he said, brushing his hands together like he'd just touched something unclean. "A black woman walking in off the street does not own property on Magnolia Drive. She mops it." Someone near the copy machine exhaled a short laugh. Brandon wasn't finished. He gestured toward the papers scattered across the floor and tilted his head. "Honey, the only deed you've ever held is a mop handle." He let that sit for a moment, then crossed his arms. "And even if by some miracle your name is on a piece of paper, paper doesn't make you the kind of person we do business with here." Dorothy did not flinch. She did not look at the papers on the floor. She did not look at the people pretending not to stare. She looked directly at Brandon Holt, and when he leaned back in his chair and said loud, comfortable, certain, "Tell you what, if you actually own that house on Magnolia Drive, I'll quit right now, on the spot. You have my word." He said it the way men say things they are absolutely sure will never be tested. He had no idea what this woman was carrying in that bag. Stay with me because what Dorothy did next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. This story goes places you will not expect. Hey everyone, I've knocked on doors I had no business knocking on, and every time someone let me into their world. Pull up a chair. The town of Harlow, Georgia, sat 40 miles south of Atlanta, close enough to feel the city's ambition, but far enough to move at its own pace. Oak trees lined the main roads. The same families had owned the same storefronts for 3 generations. On Sunday mornings, the parking lots of the Baptist churches filled up before the grocery stores did. Dorothy Caldwell had lived in Harlow for 49 years. She had arrived as a young bride in the summer of 1975, riding in the passenger seat of Robert Caldwell's pickup truck, with a suitcase, a box of kitchen things, and her grandmother's quilted blanket folded across her lap. Robert had driven with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding hers, pointing out landmarks as they passed. The school where he'd gone as a boy, the hardware store where he'd worked summers, and then, at the end of Magnolia Drive, the lot he had purchased 3 years before, a quiet half-acre of Georgia red clay and tall grass, where he had already, with his own hands, poured the foundation. "We're going to build something here," he had told her that evening, standing on the bare concrete slab as the sun went down. Something nobody can take. It had taken Robert Caldwell 4 years to build 14 Magnolia Drive. He was not a contractor. He was not a developer. He was a man who had grown up watching his father get turned away from every bank in 3 counties and had decided early in life that the only way to own something truly was to build it yourself. He taught himself from library books and from older men in the neighborhood who knew the trades. He mixed mortar on weekends. He laid brick in the evenings after his shift at the processing plant. He installed the windows himself, cutting his hands twice on the glass and bandaging them at the kitchen sink of the rented apartment where he and Dorothy lived while the house took shape. When they moved in on a Saturday morning in October of 1979, Dorothy had stood in the empty living room and pressed her palm flat against the wall. She could feel the solidity of it, not just the plaster, the intention behind it. They raised 2 children in that house. Their son Marcus had drawn pencil marks on the doorframe of the hallway every birthday until he left for college. Their daughter Vanessa had studied at the kitchen table every night for 4 years and won a full scholarship to Georgia State, then gone on to law school. Robert had planted a magnolia tree in the front yard the year Vanessa was born, and by the time she graduated, it was taller than the roof. Robert Caldwell died 26 months ago. A heart attack, quiet and sudden, on a Tuesday morning in February. Dorothy had found him in the garden with his coffee cup still in his hand. She had buried him on a Friday. She had gone back to the house on Saturday and sat in his chair by the window for a long time. She was 71 years old. Her knees ached in cold weather. She had a small pension from 34 years of teaching mathematics at Harlow Middle School, a modest savings account, and a house that was paid off in full and had been since 1998. The property had been assessed the previous spring at $387,000, not because the house was grand, but because Harlow had grown and the land on Magnolia Drive had become desirable in a way Robert had always predicted it would be. Dorothy had made the decision carefully. Vanessa had been asking her for 2 years to move to Atlanta to be closer, to stop spending winters alone in a house too large for one person. And Dorothy had finally agreed. She would sell the house, move into the apartment complex 2 blocks from Vanessa's office, and spend her mornings gardening in the community courtyard. She had done her research. She had gathered every document. The original deed from 1962, when Robert had first purchased the lot. The certificate of occupancy from 1979. Property tax receipts running in an unbroken line for 62 years. The most recent appraisal. Her photo identification. Her Social Security documentation. Everything a person could possibly need, organized into a green folder with tabbed dividers the way she had taught her students to organize their work. She had chosen Holt Premier Realty because they had the largest signs on the most lawns in Harlow. She had made an appointment for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. She had dressed carefully, her good wool coat, her church shoes, the pearl earrings Robert had given her for their 20th anniversary. She had arrived 5 minutes early. The receptionist, a young woman who did not look up from her computer, told her to take a seat. Dorothy sat and waited. At 10:17, a man emerged from the back hallway and called out a name that was not hers, then disappeared again. At 10:31, a woman in a blazer walked past Dorothy twice without acknowledging her. At 10:44, Brandon Holt finally appeared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, 40 years old, with a firm handshake and a smile that arrived before his eyes did. He wore a suit that fit well and a watch that caught the light. He glanced at Dorothy once, then at the folder on her lap, then back at her face, and something shifted in his expression. Something small and quick there and gone in less than a second. "Dorothy," he said. "Caldwell." "Ah," she replied. "Dorothy Caldwell. I have a 10 o'clock appointment." "Right." He did not apologize for the delay. He led her to his desk and sat down across from her. "So, what can I do for you today?" "I'd like to list my home for sale," Dorothy said. She placed the folder on his desk. "I've brought everything you'll need." Brandon did not open the folder. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers together, and tilted his head. "Where's the property located?" 14 Magnolia Drive, Dorothy said. Something changed in the room. Not loudly, but it changed. Brandon looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly the smile came back, but it was a different smile than the one he'd walked in with. "Magnolia Drive," he repeated. "That's correct," Dorothy said. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already decided something and are simply waiting for the conversation to catch up. "Let me be up front with you," he said, and then he reached across the desk, picked up her folder, and lifted it above his head. The folder hit the floor hard. Papers exploded outward across the tile. The appraisal report, the tax receipts, the photographs of 14 Magnolia Drive in 4 seasons, Robert's original deed from 1962, Dorothy's photo identification, all of it scattered in a wide arc across the polished floor of Holt Premier Realty. One photograph Robert standing in the front yard the summer they moved in his arm around Dorothy, both of them squinting into the Georgia sun, slid to a stop at the base of the reception desk. Nobody reached for it. Brandon Holt brushed his palms together and looked down at Dorothy Caldwell with the calm expression of a man who had done something like this before and found it effective. "These could be anything," he said, gesturing at the papers without looking at them. "Anyone can print documents. Anyone can walk in here with a folder." He paused, letting the implication land. That doesn't mean we're obligated to act on it. Dorothy looked at the photograph of Robert on the floor. Then she looked back up at Brandon. She said nothing. From behind the partition to her left, she could hear the sound of someone typing. From the hallway at the back of the office, a door opened briefly and closed again. She was aware without turning her head that at least 4 people in that office were listening to every word of this conversation while pretending not to. Brandon sat back down. He spoke in the measured tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Mrs. Caldwell, or whatever your name is, Magnolia Drive is a premium corridor. The properties there move at a different level. Our clients in that area are—" He paused, selecting his word carefully. "Established. They have relationships with us. History. It's not the kind of listing we take on from a walk-in." "I made an appointment," Dorothy said quietly. "That's not the point." Then what is the point, Mr. Holt?" He leaned forward. "The point is that this office has a brand to maintain. We have a reputation. And walking in with a stack of papers you printed off somewhere does not make you a property owner on Magnolia Drive." He sat back again. "Honey, the only deed you've ever held is a mop handle." Near the copy machine, someone exhaled a short sound. Not quite a laugh, but close. Dorothy did not move. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her eyes level. This was not the first time in 71 years that a room had tried to make her feel small. She had learned a long time ago that the best response to that particular attempt was simply to remain exactly where you were. Brandon was not finished. Melissa Pruitt appeared from the back hallway, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head. The look of a woman who managed things and considered herself good at it. She had clearly been listening. She stepped beside Brandon's desk, crossed her arms, and offered Dorothy a smile that contained no warmth. "I think what Brandon is trying to say," Melissa said, "is that perhaps a different agency would be better suited to your situation. There are some wonderful small offices in—" "I'm not interested in a different agency," Dorothy said. Melissa's smile tightened. "Well, unfortunately, we can't help everyone who walks in." "I didn't walk in as everyone," Dorothy said. "I walked in as the owner of 14 Magnolia Drive, and I made an appointment." Silence. Brandon stood up. He was a full foot taller than Dorothy, even when she was standing and she was sitting down. He used the height deliberately, stepping around the desk and positioning himself so that she would have to look up at him. "Even if your name is on a piece of paper somewhere," he said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on the particular weight of a man who believes he is delivering a final word, "paper doesn't make you the kind of person we do business with here. You understand what I'm saying?" In the back of the office, 23-year-old Tommy Reyes sat at a desk he had occupied for exactly 11 weeks. He was entering listing data into a spreadsheet. Or he was supposed to be. He had stopped typing 4 minutes ago. He sat very still, watching Brandon Holt stand over a 71-year-old woman and inform her in language that required no translation that her money, her deed, and her dignity were not welcome in this office. Tommy had grown up in Hartwell, 20 miles east. His mother had spent 3 years trying to get approved for a mortgage. He knew exactly what he was watching. His phone was in his right hand. His thumb hovered. He pressed record. Across the office, a client who had been waiting for his own appointment had also stopped looking at his phone. Richard Ashton, 44. Well-dressed, the kind of man who expected to be recognized in places like this, watched the scene with the specific discomfort of someone witnessing something they know is wrong, but have not decided to interrupt. Brandon turned back to Dorothy and spread his arms wide, his voice rising to fill the room. "Tell you what," he said. "I'm a fair man. Let's settle this right now." He looked around the office briefly, making sure he had an audience, and he did, then looked back down at her. "If you actually own that house on Magnolia Drive, if your name is legally on the deed to a property at 14 Magnolia Drive, I will quit this job. Right now, today. You have my word in front of everyone in this office." He said it the way men say things they are completely certain will never come due. Dorothy looked up at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her handbag. Dorothy's hand moved slowly inside the bag. Nobody in the office breathed. Brandon stood where he was, arms still loosely spread. His expression carrying the settled confidence of a man who has made a public challenge and is waiting for his audience to appreciate it. Melissa stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Richard Ashton had put his phone fully face down on his knee without noticing he'd done it. Tommy Reyes's own phone was still recording, its lens aimed across the room at the scene unfolding near Brandon's desk. Dorothy's hand came out of the bag. She was holding a second folder, smaller than the first. Dark blue, worn at the corners, sealed with a rubber band that had been stretched so many times it had flattened into a thin, pale strip. She set it on her lap, removed the rubber band carefully, and opened it. She withdrew a single document. It was not a photocopy. It was not something printed off the internet. It was an original, the paper thick and cream-colored with age, the edges slightly soft, bearing the kind of patina that only comes from decades of careful storage in a cool, dry place. At the top, in a typeset that belonged to another era, were the words, "Warranty Deed, Chatham County, State of Georgia." Below that, a legal description of the property, the lot number, the subdivision, the acreage, and below that, a name, Robert James Caldwell. Dorothy held the document out across the desk. Brandon did not take it immediately. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he was not expecting to see, with the brief, involuntary pause of a person whose next move has suddenly become unclear. Then he took it, holding it between 2 fingers, as though testing its weight. He read it. His jaw tightened. "This is the original purchase deed," Dorothy said, her voice calm and clear. "Robert purchased the lot in 1962. The house was completed in 1979 and we moved in that October. I have the certificate of occupancy as well, dated October 14th, 1979. She reached back into the blue folder and produced a second document. "After Robert passed the title transferred to me through the estate, that transfer was recorded with the county clerk's office 14 months ago." She placed the transfer document on the desk beside the deed. "The property sits at 14 Magnolia Drive. It has been in our family for 62 years. It is assessed at $387,000 as of last April." She folded her hands in her lap. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Holt?" The office was completely silent. Not the polite quiet of a professional environment. The particular dense silence of a room full of people who have just witnessed something that cannot be taken back. Brandon stared at the documents. His face had changed. The easy authority that had carried him through the last 20 minutes was gone not all at once, but in the way color drains from something left too long in the sun. He looked at the deed. He looked at the transfer documentation. He looked at the notary stamps, the county filing numbers, the signatures in ink that had dried decades before he had ever heard of Magnolia Drive. He looked at Dorothy Caldwell. She looked back at him without expression. Melissa Pruitt stepped forward and picked up the transfer document, scanning it quickly. Her face told the same story Brandon's did, the tight, rapid recalibration of someone who has walked confidently in a direction and suddenly found a wall. Brandon set the deed down on the desk. He cleared his throat. "I'll need to verify these with the county records," he said. His voice had changed pitch slightly. "Standard procedure." "Of course," Dorothy said. She did not move. Brandon turned toward his computer and opened a browser window. He typed the address into the Chatham County Property Records portal with the deliberate, unhurried movements of a man trying to buy himself time to think. The search loaded. The record populated on his screen. He stared at it. Property address, 14 Magnolia Drive, Harlow, Georgia. Owner of record, Dorothy May Caldwell. Property class, residential, single family. Appraised value, $387,400. Tax status current. No liens, no encumbrances. Transfer history. Robert J. Caldwell, 1962. Dorothy M. Caldwell, 2023. Brandon's hand resting on the edge of the desk went very still. Across the room, Tommy Reyes watched the screen over Brandon's shoulder and kept his phone steady. Brandon did not speak for a moment. Then he turned toward Melissa, and the look that passed between them was the kind that does not require words, two people rapidly and silently negotiating how to manage something that has gone badly wrong. "There may be some additional due diligence required," Melissa said, turning back to Dorothy with a reconstructed smile. "Our portfolio review process. Mr. Holt made a statement," Dorothy said simply. "In front of your staff and your clients. He said that if I owned the property at 14 Magnolia Drive, he would resign. Those were his exact words." Nobody moved. "I think we all understand that was a figure of speech," Melissa said. "I understood it as a commitment," Dorothy replied. From near the reception desk, Richard Ashton stood up from his chair. He looked at Brandon. He looked at the documents on the desk. He looked at Dorothy Caldwell, 71 years old, sitting straight-backed in a chair in an office that had just tried to erase her, holding her ground, with nothing more than the truth and the patience of a woman who had been carrying it for a very long time. Richard sat back down. He pulled out his phone. Not to record. To dial. Outside on the street, a car slowed as it passed the large glass window of Holt Premier Realty. The driver glanced in at the scene, the scattered papers still on the floor. The two agents standing rigid, the old woman sitting completely still in the chair, and kept driving. Inside Tommy Reyes's phone, a video was uploading. 37 seconds later, it was live. Vanessa Caldwell was in the middle of a deposition when her phone lit up. She ignored the first buzz. She ignored the second. On the third, the paralegal sitting beside her slid the phone slightly toward her across the conference table, the universal gesture for, "You need to see this." And Vanessa glanced down at the screen without picking it up. The thumbnail was grainy. Office lighting. A woman sitting in a chair. She recognized the wool coat immediately. "Excuse me," Vanessa said. She stood, gathered nothing, and walked out of the conference room without explanation. In the hallway, she pressed play. She watched the full video twice. 47 seconds the first time. 47 seconds the second time. She stood completely still in the carpeted corridor of her firm's 14th floor, and she watched Brandon Holt drop her mother's folder on the floor, And she watched him say the things he said, and she watched her mother sit in that chair and not move and not flinch and not break. Then she called Dorothy. The phone rang 3 times before her mother picked up with the particular unhurried calm she had maintained for as long as Vanessa could remember, through the worst moments of their lives, through Robert's diagnosis scare in 2011, through Marcus's accident in 2016. Through the February morning 2 years ago when Vanessa had driven 40 miles in under 30 minutes because she had heard something in her mother's voice on the phone that she had never heard before. "Kid Mama," Vanessa said. "Where are you right now?" "Still here," Dorothy said. "Sitting in my car in their parking lot." "You're still there?" "I'm not in any hurry." Vanessa pressed her hand flat against the hallway wall. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." A pause. "Are you okay?" Vanessa closed her eyes for a moment. 44 years old, a licensed real estate attorney with 16 years of practice, a woman who had argued in front of circuit court judges and won, and her mother had just asked if she was okay. "I'm coming," Vanessa said. "You don't need to. I'm already getting my keys." She was on I-85 South within 12 minutes. As the Atlanta skyline fell away behind her and the highway opened up into the wide Georgia flatlands, Vanessa drove and thought about 14 Magnolia Drive. The way she always thought about it, not as a property, not as an asset, not as the $387,000 line item on an appraisal report, but as the particular smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings, biscuits and coffee and the radio playing low, the pencil marks on the hallway doorframe, the way the afternoon light came through the back windows in October and turned the whole house amber. She thought about her father. Robert Caldwell had never once in Vanessa's memory spoken about the obstacles he had faced, building that house without a contractor's license, without a developer's backing, without a single institution in Harlow, willing to extend credit to a black man buying land in a corridor that was in 1962 understood by everyone to be meant for someone else. He had not spoken about the neighbors who had called the county assessor's office twice in the first year to dispute his right to be there. He had not spoken about the loan officer who had laughed when he walked in. He had not spoken about the evenings he had driven home from the processing plant, changed his clothes, and gone out to lay bricks in the dark, because the daylight hours were not his to use. He had spoken about the house. He had spoken about the foundation, how he had learned the correct ratio of water to concrete mix from a library book, and verified it with an older man on Decatur Street, who had built 3 houses himself. He had spoken about the windows, the framing, the particular satisfaction of watching a wall go up true and plumb. He had spoken about the morning he had laid the last brick and stood back and understood that it was done. Something nobody can take, he had said. Vanessa had been in law school when she first fully understood what her father had built, not just the physical structure, but the legal permanence of it. A paid-off property in a family's name documented and recorded and continuous for decades was not simply a home. It was an argument. It was evidence. It was a rebuttal written in brick and deed paper against every system that had tried to say, "You don't belong here." Her father had known that. He had built it anyway. And now a man in a fitted suit had picked up 62 years of her family's history and dropped it on the floor. Vanessa's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it at a red light. The video Tommy Reyes had posted had 42,000 views. Then she refreshed. 61,000. The comments were running fast, outrage recognition people tagging news accounts, people sharing their own stories, people writing things like "This happened to my grandmother," and "This happened to us, and I know exactly what this is." She called Gloria Marsh from the car. Gloria picked up on the second ring, which meant she had already seen the video. "I know," Gloria said before Vanessa could speak. "How long has Holt Premier been operating?" 11 years in Harlow. I've had 2 referrals in the past 18 months that I think connect to them. Nothing I could move on. Until now. Pastor Brooks, Vanessa said. Already called him this morning. He's ready to talk. Vanessa exhaled. I'll be in Harlow in 40 minutes. Your mother is something else, Gloria said quietly. I know, Vanessa said. She always has been. She ended the call and drove. 40 miles south in the parking lot of Holt Premier Realty, Dorothy Caldwell sat in the driver's seat of her gray Buick, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the front door of the office. She was not anxious. She was not afraid. She was waiting. She had learned a long time ago that the truth did not need you to chase it. You simply had to stay close enough that when it arrived, you were still standing there. Inside the office, Brandon Holt's computer screen showed a number that had not stopped climbing. He stared at it. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the video had 214,000 views. Brandon Holt knew this because he had refreshed the page 11 times in the past hour, each number larger than the last. Each refresh carrying the particular dread of a man watching something he cannot stop accelerate toward him. He sat at his desk with the door closed and his jacket off and his phone face up in front of him. And he thought about the fastest way to make this something other than what it was. He called the company's PR contact at 3 minutes past 2. Her name was Carol, and she answered with the brisk efficiency of someone who had already been expecting the call. I've seen it, Carol said. How many of your staff were present? 6, maybe 7. Did anyone intervene? Brandon said nothing. Brandon. No. Carol was quiet for a moment. Okay. Here's what we do. We get ahead of the narrative. We frame this as a misunderstanding involving an elderly woman who came in distressed and disoriented. We express concern for her well-being. We make it about her state of mind, not about anything your agent said or did. A pause. Do you have any prior documentation on this woman? Any record of the interaction? Not yet. Get Melissa to write up an incident report. Today before close of business. Log it as a disruption to normal office operations. Agitated customer erratic behavior. Don't use specific language about race, keep it clinical. Concerned for her welfare, offered assistance, she declined. Another pause. And get your staff aligned. Everyone who was in that office needs to be on the same page before this gets any bigger. Brandon ended the call and opened his door. Melissa was already at the printer. She had drafted the incident report herself, without being asked, 2 paragraphs measured, and careful describing an unidentified elderly woman who had arrived at the office presenting documents she could not clearly explain, become agitated when staff attempted to assist her and declined offers of further help. The language was so clean it was almost invisible. There was nothing in it that was technically a lie. There was nothing in it that was anywhere close to the truth. Brandon read it, made 2 small changes, and handed it back. Get everyone to sign it, he said. Melissa nodded and moved toward the main floor. Tommy Reyes was at his desk when she approached. She set the printed sheet in front of him and placed a pen on top of it. Standard incident documentation, she said, not meeting his eyes. I just confirms what happened this morning from a staff perspective. Tommy picked up the paper and read it. He read it twice. This says she was agitated, he said. That's the characterization, yes. She wasn't agitated. Tommy set the paper down. She was completely calm the entire time. Melissa's smile did not change. Tommy, you've been with us 11 weeks. This is how we handle situations like this. It protects the office, and it protects you. She let that last word carry its weight. So I thought Brandon mentioned you're up for review at the end of the quarter. Tommy looked at the paper. He looked at Melissa, He said nothing. He did not pick up the pen. Melissa moved on to the next desk. Across town at the same moment, Brandon made a second call. This one to Richard Ashton, whose appointment had ended abruptly that morning when Richard had quietly gathered his things and left without rescheduling. Richard answered on the fourth ring. "Richard, I want to personally apologize for this morning." Brandon said, his voice carrying the particular warmth he reserved for clients in Richard's income bracket. "We had an unfortunate situation with a walk-in customer, and things got a bit disorganized. I'd love to get you back in, maybe dinner this week. Talk through the Whitfield property." "I saw the video," Richard said, a beat of silence. "Richard, that footage doesn't capture the full context." "Brandon." Richard's voice was even. "I've been a client of yours for 6 years. I've referred 4 people to your office." A pause. "I know what I saw this morning. I was sitting 10 feet away." Another pause longer. "I won't be coming back." The line went quiet. Brandon set his phone face down on the desk. He sat for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and pulled up the MLS listings for Harlow. He found a comparable property, 3 bedrooms, similar square footage, older construction, listed by a colleague in a neighboring office. He picked up his desk phone and called, arranging to fast-track a listing agreement for another client. A client who had walked in that same morning and been seated, offered coffee, and moved through the intake process in under 20 minutes. That client's name was not Dorothy Caldwell. Tommy Reyes watched the call from across the room. He had already photographed the incident report Melissa had left on his desk. He had already forwarded the video to 3 people. And he had 40 minutes earlier opened a browser window and searched for 2 things: the Fair Housing Act and the Department of Housing and Urban Development's complaint hotline. The number was 1-800-669-9777. He had not called it yet. At 5:17 that afternoon, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot of a diner called Lula's 4 blocks from the Holt Premier Realty office. The woman who stepped out was 51 years old, wore a federal identification badge clipped to her blazer, and had spent the last 4 months building a case file on a pattern of housing discrimination in Harlow, Georgia, that she had not yet been able to close. Her name was Agent Diana Wu. She had seen the video at noon. She had been in Harlow since 2 o'clock. She ordered coffee, opened her laptop, and began drafting an updated activity log. Outside in the parking lot, a gray Buick pulled in 2 spaces away. Dorothy Caldwell stepped out, smoothed her coat, and walked toward the diner door. Lula's diner smelled like coffee and cornbread, and the particular warmth of a place that had been feeding people for a long time, without asking them too many questions. Diana Wu looked up from her laptop when the bell above the door chimed. She watched the older woman in the wool coat step inside, pause to let her eyes adjust to the light, and then scan the room with the slow, deliberate attention of someone who notices things. Their eyes met. Diana reached over and placed her hand flat on the empty seat across from her. Dorothy walked to the booth and sat down. "Ms. Caldwell," Diana said. "You know my name," Dorothy said. "I've known your address for about 4 months." Diana turned her laptop slightly so Dorothy could see the screen, a spreadsheet dense with entries, zip codes, and dates and names and notation codes. "I've been watching Holt Premier Realty since October. We received a formal complaint last fall from a pastor, Eugene Brooks, denied representation, no written reason given. Property on Berry Street that was later listed by a different agency 2 weeks later at a substantially higher asking price." She scrolled down. Before that, a family on DeSoto Avenue. Before that, a retired school teacher on Grant Street who was told her property, quote, didn't meet portfolio standards. Diana looked up. Same language, same office, same agent, Dorothy was quiet for a moment. How many? Documented 11, suspected closer to 30 over 3 years. Diana closed the laptop. What happened in that office this morning wasn't an accident, Ms. Caldwell. It wasn't one man having a bad day. It was a pattern that someone finally caught on camera. The bell above the door chimed again. Vanessa Caldwell came in still wearing her deposition jacket, her briefcase over one shoulder, her eyes finding her mother before she had fully cleared the entrance. She crossed the diner in 6 steps, put her hand on Dorothy's shoulder, and looked at Diana. "Vanessa Caldwell," she said. "I'm Dorothy's daughter and her legal representative." Diana nodded. "Agent Diana Wu, SHUD, Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity." She gestured to the seat. "Please." Vanessa sat. She was already opening her briefcase. For the next 40 minutes, the 3 women worked through what they had. Diana laid out the federal framework, the Fair Housing Act, the specific provisions against discrimination in the sale, rental, and terms of residential real estate, the evidentiary threshold required for an enforcement action. Vanessa laid out what she had Pastor Brooks's willingness to provide a sworn statement, the documented pattern of Brandon's client intake, the incident report. She had already confirmed Melissa was circulating for signatures inside the office. And that report is a problem for them. Diana said, "Not for you. If they're soliciting false witness statements, that's obstruction. It becomes part of the case." "Tommy Reyes," Vanessa said. "Already on my list," Diana replied. Dorothy had said almost nothing during the meeting. She sat with her coffee listening, watching the 2 younger women build the architecture of what came next. When there was a pause, she spoke. "There's something else," she said. Both women looked at her. Dorothy reached into her bag and withdrew the blue folder. She opened it on the table and removed a document that neither Diana nor Vanessa had seen before, a letter handwritten, dated March of 1962, on the letterhead of a county assessor's office that no longer existed. It was addressed to Robert James Caldwell and informed him in formal language that did not trouble itself with warmth that his application to purchase the lot at what would become 14 Magnolia Drive had been reviewed, and that while there was no legal basis for denial, the assessor's office wanted to make clear that development of the property by a colored family would be the letter used, the word discouraged. Robert had kept the letter. He had framed it briefly and then taken it down and filed it. He had told Dorothy once that he kept it not out of anger, but out of documentation. Someday, he had said, someone will try to say it didn't happen. "I want there to be paper." Diana looked at the letter for a long time without speaking. "This is from 1962, she said. "Yes," Dorothy said, "and the house was built anyway. He poured the foundation the following spring." Diana looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at her mother. Something passed between the 3 women in that booth that did not need to be spoken, the particular recognition of a thread that ran from 1962 to that morning unbroken, the same machinery wearing different clothes in different decades. Diana closed her notebook and looked directly at Dorothy. "Well, Ms. Caldwell, I need to ask you something, and I want you to take your time answering." She paused. "Are you willing to be the named complainant in a federal fair housing enforcement action against Holt Premier Realty?" Dorothy set down her coffee cup. "Robert always said the only way a wrong gets right is if somebody stands up and puts their name on it," she said. "He put his name on that deed in 1962 when they told him not to." She looked at Diana evenly. "I'll put my name on this." Diana nodded and opened a new page in her notebook. Outside on the street, the last of the afternoon light was falling across Harlow. At Holt Premier Realty, 4 blocks away, Brandon Holt was still at his desk, his incident report printed and signed by 5 of his 6 staff members. The 6th, Tommy Reyes, had left early, citing a headache. Brandon did not know that Tommy had spent his lunch hour on the phone with an attorney. He did not know about the meeting at Lula's. He did not know that at that moment, Vanessa Caldwell was walking toward his office with a briefcase in one hand and 62 years of documentation in the other. The bell above the front door of Holt Premier Realty chimed at 4:51. Brandon looked up. Vanessa Caldwell did not knock. She pushed open the glass door of Holt Premier Realty at 4:51 in the afternoon and walked in with the particular momentum of a woman who has been building toward a moment for her entire drive down I-85. The receptionist looked up. Vanessa did not stop at the desk. She walked directly to Brandon Holt's office, where he sat behind his desk with his jacket back on and his expression reconstructed into something approximating composure, and she set her briefcase on the chair across from him without being invited to sit. "Ms." he began. "Vanessa Caldwell," she said. "Licensed real estate attorney, State of Georgia, bar number 47219. Dorothy Caldwell is my mother." She opened the briefcase. "You have about 3 minutes before this conversation becomes considerably more complicated, so I'd suggest you listen carefully." Brandon's jaw tightened. He reached for the phone on his desk. "I'd also suggest you don't call Melissa," Vanessa said, without looking up from the documents she was arranging on his desk. "She's currently being interviewed in the conference room by Agent Diana Wu of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So she's a little busy." Brandon's hand stopped. He had not heard anyone come in through the back. He had not heard anything from the conference room. The realization moved across his face slowly, the way cold water moves first at the surface, then deeper, then everywhere at once. He turned his head toward the glass partition that separated his office from the main floor. Through it, he could see the conference room door closed, a sliver of light underneath it, the muffled shape of voices he could not make out. "What is this?" he said. It came out less like a question than like a man telling himself something was not happening. "This," Vanessa said, placing the first document on his desk, "is a formal complaint filed this afternoon with the HUD Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, naming you and Holt Premier Realty as respondents in a pattern and practice discrimination case under the Fair Housing Act. Sections 3604 and 3605. She placed a second document beside it. "This is a preservation notice requiring you to retain all client intake records, internal communications, listing agreements, and staff correspondence for the past 3 years. You are legally prohibited, as of the timestamp on that document, from destroying, deleting, or altering any records covered by its scope." She placed a third document on the desk. "And this," she said, "is a sworn affidavit from Pastor Eugene Brooks, who visited this office 6 months ago with a property on Berry Street assessed at $260,000 and was told by you personally that his listing did not meet your portfolio criteria. 2 weeks later, the same property was listed by Meridian Realty at $295,000. She looked at him. He kept every email, every voicemail, every note from every phone call. Brandon stared at the documents. The conference room door opened. Melissa Pruitt came out first, her arms crossed tight across her chest, her face carrying the particular rigidity of someone fighting to maintain composure and losing the fight. Behind her came Agent Diana Wu, unhurried, a legal pad under her arm, her federal badge visible at her lapel. Behind Diana came a second agent. Vanessa had not met, younger male carrying a document case. Behind all of them came Tommy Reyes. Tommy had changed out of his work shirt. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and carrying a manila envelope. He stopped just outside the conference room door and looked at Brandon with the expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in the past several hours and is now simply living it. Mr. Reyes provided us with internal office communications spanning 14 months, Diana said, stopping outside Brandon's office doorway, including a distribution email sent from your address to all licensed agents in this office on February 2nd of last year, outlining what you called intake discretion guidelines for properties in 12 specific zip codes. She opened her legal pad to a flagged page and read aloud, "Use professional judgment when assessing client fit for premium corridor listings. Our brand depends on the quality of representation we take on. When in doubt, refer out." She looked up. The 12 zip codes listed as requiring enhanced intake discretion correspond exactly to the 6 predominantly black neighborhoods in Harlow and the surrounding county. The office had gone completely still. Sandra Cole, who had been at her desk near the window pretending to review a file for the past 40 minutes, set the file down. The receptionist had her hands flat on her keyboard and was not typing. The one remaining agent in the main office, a young woman named Patricia, who had been with Holt Premier for 8 months, was staring at her screen with the look of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about where they worked. Brandon stood up. "I want my attorney," he said. "That's your right," Diana said. "We're not placing you under arrest at this time. This is an administrative enforcement action. However, we are executing a records preservation order, and we will need access to your system within the hour." She looked at the second agent. "Marcus." The younger agent opened the document case and began setting up. Brandon looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at the floor. He looked at Tommy. Tommy held his gaze without flinching. He looked at Vanessa, who was calmly reorganizing her briefcase with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who has done exactly what she came to do. "There is one more thing," Vanessa said, closing the briefcase clasp. She looked at Brandon directly. "You made a statement this morning in front of staff and clients that if my mother owned the property at 14 Magnolia Drive, you would resign." She tilted her head slightly. "Her name is on the deed. The county record confirms it. Your own system confirmed it this morning at approximately 11:42 a.m. A pause. "We have that on video." Nobody in the office moved. "So," Vanessa said, "is there anything you'd like to do about that?" Brandon Holt submitted his resignation at 6:47 that evening. He did not announce it. He did not gather the office. He typed 3 sentences into an email addressed to the corporate ownership of Holt Premier Realty's parent company, attached his signed letter, and hit send from his phone in the parking lot, because he could not bring himself to go back inside the building. The letter cited personal reasons. It did not mention Dorothy Caldwell. It did not mention Agent Wu. It did not mention the 47-second video that had, by the time he sat in his car, accumulated 1.8 million views across 3 platforms. He sat there for a long time with the engine off. Inside, Diana Wu and her colleague Marcus completed the records preservation sweep at 7:22. They left with 3 external drives, a physical copy of every intake form filed in the past 36 months, and the printed email chain Tommy had described, the intake discretion guidelines, the zip code list, and 7 follow-up messages in which Brandon had praised agents for successfully redirecting what he called misaligned walk-ins. It took federal investigators 11 days to build the full picture. What they found documented and cataloged and cross-referenced against county property records was a system that had been operating in Harlow for 3 years with quiet efficiency. 47 individuals and families had been turned away from Holt Premier Realty without written reason. Of those 47, 43 lived in or were purchasing property in the 6 zip codes Brandon's email had designated for enhanced intake discretion. Of those 43, every single one was black. The properties they had been trying to list or purchase were not distressed. They were not complicated. Several were assessed higher than properties Holt Premier had taken on without hesitation from white clients in the same month. The pattern was not subtle. It had simply never been documented until Tommy Reyes started saving emails. The formal HUD findings were issued on a Tuesday morning, 31 days after Dorothy Caldwell had sat in that chair and watched her husband's papers fall on the floor. The findings cited Holt Premier Realty for systematic violations of the Fair Housing Act across a documented period of 38 months. The penalty structure included $2.1 million in federal fines, mandatory restitution to identified complainants, and a consent decree requiring complete operational restructuring under federal oversight if the company wished to continue operating in Georgia. Brandon Holt's real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the civil proceedings. The suspension notice arrived by certified mail on a Wednesday. His attorney called him that afternoon. The call lasted 4 minutes. Melissa Pruitt was terminated by the parent company the day the HUD findings were released. Her license was placed under review. She did not contest it. Her cooperation with investigators during the initial interview, Diana Wu noted in her report, had been immediate and detailed once it became clear that the evidence was comprehensive. She had answered every question. She had not protected Brandon Holt with any of her answers. Pastor Eugene Brooks gave a statement on the steps of his church on Berry Street the morning the findings were made public. He spoke without notes in the particular unhurried cadence of a man who has been waiting a long time to say something true in a place where people can hear it. I want every black family in Harlow to know, he said, that what happened to me and what happened to Dorothy Caldwell has a name. It has a law against it, and it has consequences. He paused. We just needed someone to stay in that chair long enough to prove it. Vanessa filed the civil suit on behalf of Dorothy on the same day the HUD findings were released. The complaint named Brandon Holt individually Holt Premier Realty as an entity and the parent company under vicarious liability theory. It sought damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress violation of the Fair Housing Act and defamation, the latter arising from Melissa's incident report, which had characterized Dorothy as agitated and disoriented, and which had been submitted to the company's PR team and used in a press statement released the afternoon of the incident. That press statement had been live for approximately 4 hours before Diana Wu's preservation notice made deleting it a federal violation. It remained indexed on the internet. Vanessa's complaint included a screenshot. Tommy Reyes received a formal whistleblower protection designation from the Department of Labor 12 days after the enforcement action began. His employment at Holt Premier was terminated the morning after Diana Wu's visit. Melissa had sent the email herself at 6:53 a.m. before she understood the full scope of what was coming. The termination letter cited performance concerns. The timestamp placed it 14 hours after Tommy had provided federal investigators with evidence. That termination letter became Exhibit D in the whistleblower filing. Tommy received a call 3 weeks later from a woman named Renata James, who ran an independent brokerage in Decatur that specialized in first-generation homebuyers. She had seen his name in the news coverage. She had read the accounts of what he had done and what it had cost him. She asked if he was looking for work. He said he was. She said she would like to meet. They met on a Thursday at a coffee shop on Ponce de Leon. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Tommy accepted the offer before he got back to his car. 47 families received notification letters from the HUD restitution process. The letters were formal, printed on government letterhead, and outlined the complaint process and the available remedies. They arrived in mailboxes across 6 zip codes in Harlow and the surrounding county on the same morning. Several of those families had stopped looking for houses. Several had assumed the problem was with them. The letters told them otherwise. And in a small house on Berry Street, Pastor Eugene Brooks received his letter, read it twice at his kitchen table, and then set it down and sat quietly for a moment thinking about the woman in the wool coat who had stayed in that chair. Dorothy Caldwell did not sell 14 Magnolia Drive. She had thought about it carefully, the way she thought about most things. Not quickly, not under pressure, but in the early morning hours when the house was quiet, and the light came in gray through the kitchen window, and the coffee was hot, and Robert's chair sat empty across the table, the way it had sat for 2 years, and would probably sit for however many years she had left. She had thought about Atlanta, about the apartment 2 blocks from Vanessa's office, about the community courtyard, where she had imagined herself gardening on spring mornings. It had seemed sensible, practical. The right next step for a woman of 71 living alone in a 4-bedroom house that was too large for one person. But she kept coming back to a morning from a long time ago. Robert had been laying the last section of the back fence a Saturday in early June, the Georgia heat already building by 9 o'clock, the grass wet with dew. She had brought him coffee and sat on the steps and watched him work, and at some point he had stopped and looked at the house from the outside. Really looked at it, the way you look at something you made with your hands, and he had said without turning around, "I built this so our children would know what it feels like to own something, so they'd know it was possible, so they'd know what to fight for." Dorothy had not fully understood it then. She understood it now. She called Vanessa in early March, 6 weeks after the HUD findings were released. She told her daughter she had made a decision. Vanessa listened without interrupting. She had learned this from Dorothy herself, the particular patience of a woman who waited for the whole sentence before responding. "I'm not selling," Dorothy said, "but I'm not keeping it the way it is either." The Robert Caldwell Community House opened on the first Saturday of April. It was not a grand opening. There were no balloons, no catering, no press release. Dorothy had called 12 people, and those 12 people had each told 2 or 3 others, and by 10 o'clock on that Saturday morning, there were 31 people sitting in the living room of 14 Magnolia Drive, young couples, single mothers, a man in his 60s who had been trying to understand a mortgage document for 4 months, a 26-year-old woman who had saved $11,000 and did not know what to do next. Dorothy stood in the front of the room, in the same room where Robert had laid the floors, where Vanessa had studied for the bar exam, where Marcus had measured himself against the doorframe every birthday, and she looked at the people who had come and she said simply, "My husband built this house so that nobody could take it from us. We're going to use it, so nobody can take yours from you either." The sessions ran every Saturday from 10 to noon. Dorothy taught the fundamentals, what a deed was, what a title search was, what escrow meant, what to look for in a listing agreement, what your rights were under the Fair Housing Act, what to do and who to call if someone tried to tell you that you did not belong in a neighborhood, or could not afford a certain property, or were not the right kind of person for a particular street. Tommy Reyes came the 3rd Saturday and never stopped coming. He brought printed materials from the brokerage in Decatur, walked through real scenarios, answered questions from people who had been too embarrassed to ask them anywhere else. Pastor Brooks brought 6 families from his congregation. He sat in the back and let Dorothy lead. And afterward, he told Vanessa that watching her mother teach was like watching someone translate a language that had been kept from people on purpose. The civil suit settled in July. The terms were not public, but Vanessa confirmed in a brief statement that the resolution included full satisfaction of damages for Dorothy restitution contributions to the HUD fund and a binding agreement from the parent company prohibiting the Holt Premier name from operating in Georgia under any future licensee. Brandon Holt's license was permanently revoked following the civil settlement and a separate finding by the Georgia Real Estate Commission. The Robert Caldwell Housing Fund, established with the settlement proceeds, awarded its first 3 grants in August. The grants covered closing costs and inspection fees for first-time Black homebuyers in Harlow and the surrounding county. The first recipient was a 29-year-old woman named Alicia Drummond, who had been trying to purchase a house on Sycamore Street for 11 months and had been told twice by different lenders that her application needed more time. Alicia's application was approved 14 days after the grant came through. She moved in on a Saturday, on the morning of the 1-year anniversary of the day she had walked into Holt Premier Realty. Dorothy Caldwell drove to 14 Magnolia Drive before the Saturday session began. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment looking at the house the brick Robert had laid the magnolia tree he had planted the year Vanessa was born. The front steps he had poured on a July afternoon with his shirt off and his radio playing. She got out of the car and walked to the front door and stood there with her hand on the frame. In her bag was the original 1962 warranty deed, the one she had placed on Brandon Holt's desk 10 months ago. She had taken it back that day, returned it to its folder, and brought it home. She had framed it not to display it, but to keep it where she could see it, on the wall of the hallway beside the pencil marks Marcus had left on the doorframe. She had added one thing to the frame. Below the deed, on a small card in her own handwriting, she had written Robert's words, "Something nobody can take." She unlocked the door and went inside. By 10 o'clock, the living room was full.
There is a kind of dignity that cannot be manufactured and cannot be taken. It is built slowly, quietly, over a lifetime of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Dorothy Caldwell did not walk into that office to become a symbol. She walked in as a woman who knew what her husband had built and refused to pretend otherwise. She stayed in that chair. She told the truth. And she let the truth do what it always does when someone is patient enough to give it time. If this story moved you, if you've ever sat in a chair where someone tried to make you feel like you didn't belong, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what this meant to you. And if you want more stories about people who stayed in the chair when it would have been easier to leave, subscribe. The next one is already waiting.